This is season 3, episode 22 of the 100% Dad podcast with Townsend Russell. We've got Chris Lakes. He's from Community for a Cause. He's also written the book, Help Your Toddler Meet Their Milestones, 101 Behavior Hacks, which when you reached out to me, the thing that pulled to me is that, how do we help young kids overcome picky eatings, follow rules better, build better social skills, de-escalate aggression, de-escalate tantrums and meltdowns. Uh, and so that's your book. And then I guess you also work for this organization that's it looks like it does a lot with like lead and water supply. Is that accurate?
That
Did I
is
summarize
accurate.
this? Did I summarize this decently?
You sure did. Thanks, Townsend. Yeah, Community for a Cause is my baby. I actually created it 8 years ago. To this day was our first event. We had a fashion fundraiser for childhood lead poisoning. And the reason behind that is because my day job is a special educator. I primarily work with kids with autism that are about 2 to 3 years old in early intervention. I have worked with kids up to 15 as well. And what strikes me, continues to strike me today, is that every single classroom I've worked in for the last 16 years, I've come across kids with lead poisoning. And this is before Flint was on the national mindscape. So I kept asking myself, what's going on here? Why am I seeing this? And it led me to eventually say, maybe there's something more I can do for these kids because behavior therapy is very effective for kids with autism, but kids with lead poisoning typically are being exposed at the home. So even if they learn, they go back home, they're re-exposed, the learning's
So,
lost.
so are we
Mhm.
saying here that that the lead in the water supply is a cause of the autism, or it's preventing, I guess, correction of behavior issues in autistic kids? Is that what you're saying, or making the connection there?
So no, I want to be very, very clear. So lead does not cause autism, but what lead does do, it can create autistic like symptoms because it will delay speech, it will cause aggression, it will cause difficulty learning because it's impairing memory ultimately. Lead is interrupting the entire neural network so that the transmissions of neurotransmitters can't happen, which means that the messages can't reach the parts of the brain it needs to. In other areas, it'll make false messages shoot off where you might see uh, almost bizarre behavior or compulsive behavior, impulsive behavior, without obvious reason. So if you were to have a kid in a room who has autism and have another child in the room who has lead poisoning, at first glance you can't tell the difference. The behaviors seem identical. They both might have speech delays. They both might have what we might consider non-functional behavior, and they both would have difficulty learning to our own esteem. As a teacher, what I've learned though, after about 3 to 4 weeks after getting to know my students, I'd be able to pick out the kids with autism. They'd slip, and I'm speaking from my personal experience. And what I would see is that the kids with autism would slip and they'd say something. For the first time, I heard them say a word. Maybe they saw fish sticks for lunch for the first time, and they say fish sticks. I said, "Wait a second, buddy, you can talk? Okay, you're going to talk every single day. I'm going to give you fish sticks every single day to get these words coming and get you more and more normalized to using your words." The kids with lead poisoning, though, they would show me that they want to speak but can't. And it would break my heart. I remember this one kid I had who was 3 years old who was hitting his throat with his panicked eyes, communicating almost like, I know I'm supposed to do something with this, but I don't know how. And ultimately, the progress that kids with autism would make was more consistent. The kids with lead poisoning, they plateaued and flatlined. And if there was a long break, say like a Christmas, New Year's break, or even a 3 day weekend, when they came back, progress was always almost back to square one. And
So
it was
how do you know if they have lead poisoning?
the medical files. So in New York, we have to have kids tested twice before they reach the age of 2 in order to enter an EI program or preschool. This doesn't always happen, unfortunately, but most kids are tested. And so, looking at the medical files, you can see, oh, this kid has through level 3, so to speak, 3 micrograms per deciliter of lead in their blood. This kid has 5. This kid has X, Y, and Z. So you can tell the difference by literally looking at their blood tests. Um, do kids with autism also have some lead in their blood? Some, depending on where they live. And does lead affect kids with autism? Yes, it will. It will only exacerbate the symptoms, right?
Okay, and so lead is always going to be environmental. It's always going to be, I guess, where you're spending your time because you're breathing it in or consuming it.
It's unfortunate because despite the known risks, we were a bit cavalier in our use of lead globally, right? I mean, lead paint has been used very liberally across America, across other countries as well. We phased it out in the 70s, but Most houses were built before the 70s. So if you're doing construction and someone's sawing through a wall or something, that's releasing lead dust.
Sure.
Most pipes in houses built before 1986 have lead in them. Brass is made of lead. If you're drinking from a hose in your backyard and it's got a brass nozzle, there's lead there. People aren't fully aware of that. And before 1995, canned food had lead in the lining, and they phased that out. So there's so many different ways that we can be exposed to this, and it's so ubiquitous, but it's also so insidious at the same time because it's small trace amounts, and people who are producing things that have this can always argue, well, that's not enough to cause damage, and in a one-off, they're right, right? But if it's every single day, there's a cumulative effect, and that's what is not factored for, and that's what science doesn't have yet a way to really link a causal uh, framework for. So, you and I just living in cities, we're exposed to lead. Our body can do what it can to block the absorption of it, but it really likes to stay in the body, bones and blood for years to decades, depending on
Yeah,
what the
I was
problem
about to
is.
say, so how do you remove lead from your system?
You got to wait. So if it's in your blood, it takes about 4 weeks to get out of your blood. But that doesn't mean that
Oh,
it's not just leaving your body. It'll still go into some of your organs and tissues. If it goes into your bones, it'll stay there for 20 to 30 years. And literally, it can be passed down from mother to child because if you have it in your body and blood, once you're pregnant, there's a lot of blood moving around, and that's going to go into your fetus. If you break a bone, that's going to be re-released. If a mother is breastfeeding, that's actually one way for a woman to get rid of lead, but it's going directly into the baby's mouth, right? It's kind of terrifying to a certain extent. There are certain foods we can eat, and this is actually what made me throw the fashion show and make me think of creating a charity. There are certain foods we can eat that have the ability to bind to lead and other toxic heavy metals and remove them. Such foods include cilantro, as well as this algae called chlorella, and another algae called spirulina. The problem is there's not a lot of research on plants and using plants as remedies or medicine because there's not a lot of money in things we can't patent, right? And
well, that's
unfortunately, yeah,
the whole plant space is definitely changing.
yeah, thank God. Thank God. Um, but there is some research, there's just not hefty enough research for anyone to, in the medical community, to really um, champion the cause of saying, hey, if you have a proper diet, you can count X, Y, and Z. If you have enough blueberries in your diet, you can have X, Y, and Z. Cilantro, chlorella. And
Oh yeah, that information's definitely out there. I mean, that is definitely trending in the last few decades. I mean, that's why all the health grocery stores are popping up, and why bigger sections of the grocery store are dedicated to organic and healthy, and
thank God.
all these new brands are popping up that are clean or this free or that free.
Right.
That is definitely a trending discussion. Now, I've never heard it associated with lead before. Um, Luckily, we eat a lot of tacos, so we eat a lot of cilantro, so maybe
There
that's
you
good
go.
for us.
Keep it going. Keep the tacos and guac, man. Get the tacos and
But
guac.
but
There
we're
is one
also
more
spent
plant.
we
There's
also
one
spent
more
the
plant
last
that I
couple of
want
years.
to. Go ahead.
Tell me about that in a second. We're also in an RV all the time, so every RV uses a hose to connect to water. So all our fittings are, I assume, brass. I've never even checked.
So you can buy lead-free brass, but it'll be explicitly labeled as such. So
Okay,
that's, yeah, food for thought. They
I've
do
never
have
looked.
that. Yeah, yeah.
What's the other plant?
So oddly enough, a couple years back, I changed my Google search algorithm. I'm on the Scholar Google all the time, and I'm looking for what other foods remove lead from the body. Right? I watched this plant-based documentary oh no, 8 years ago, and that made me realize cilantro does this, and I said I gotta tell the world, and that's how my charity was born. But a few years later, I asked myself, well, what reverses? Can anything reverse the damage lead poison does, particularly to the brain? Because common knowledge is that the brain damage that's done is irreversible. And I, for whatever reason, said, let me just change my algorithm. And I found this plant, right? This research that was done by a Columbia University team, Dr. Tomas Viarte, tested this tropical daisy. It's called a Tridax daisy, right? And there's a little compound inside it. Just like vitamin C is a compound inside oranges and lemons, there's a compound inside this daisy that's called 7,8 dehydroxyflavone. And what it does is it goes inside your body, it's absorbed, crosses the blood brain barrier, and it's able to actually have the brain operate as if there was no lead in it. It doesn't remove lead, right? But it allows the processes that the brain needs in order for us to remember, thus to learn, to happen anyway. And they gave it to these mice for only 15 days. And after 15 days, the brain was restored in its function. in particular part of the hippocampus called the Schaefer collateral. It's basically the doorway to memory. And I'm working now with two teams in Uganda to replicate these studies with children because again,
Yeah, I was about to say, it seems like if it's a plan, it'd be an easy study to conduct
I
with
agree.
humans.
I agree. I agree. But again, the issue is in this country in particular, the FDA can't call any plant a medicine, right? It's against the law right now. Even if we
Sure.
know this plant actually helped, your Aunt Sue or your Uncle Jack with their high blood pressure or the diabetes or what have you, that's why in every bottle, every supplement bottle that we have, you'll see a label that says this has not been FDA evaluated. It is not intended to treat, prevent, or cure any ailment. I mean, this is on bottles of vitamin C, B12, even prenatal vitamins will say this, despite the fact we know pregnant people probably should be taking prenatal vitamins. But if it's plant based, they by law can't say it's a remedy, treatment, etc. So again, there's little interest in doctors and medical teams to work for this research. So, I have to go all the way to
Well,
Uganda to
and
make
and I
some
s- yeah,
documentary to
and I
show people.
assume that all that wording and the reason it's law is because there was a time, the era of snake oil
Yeah,
salesmen,
yeah,
when
yeah.
it was blatantly overdone, and so they had to create some
They put a
sort of
cap on
fine
it.
line,
Yeah.
yeah, to keep people from being duped as easily.
Well, also to be fair, and to be fair, also, they can't factor it for it, right? So if I grow Tridax daisies in my backyard, and you grow it where you are, right, and someone else grows it in North Canada, they can't factor for the soil, they can't factor for
Oh, sure,
fertilizer,
sure.
so they can't say like, well, what's the purity? Like they're like, nope, you know what? Forget it. We know if it's made in a factory, it's made the same exact way, whether it's made in the Philippines or it's made in Mexico.
Yeah.
So that's a fair concern from a scientific point of view.
Okay. Let's get off lead because the
Cool.
real interest I had was your 101 behavior hacks book.
Fair enough.
And we've talked about this before with child psychologists and doctors on the show of how do we impact behavior,
Mm,
especially in young kids, and there is a shift from younger ages, toddlers, single digits, when you start getting middle school, high school age, teenagers, preteen. There's different tactics. Some of them
right,
are still practical, but it's more adult, I guess, and
right,
and
right.
how you handle those things, 'cause a little bit more of an independent person that has established a foundation. Um, so, what are some of your tips? You've got these hacks for improving behavior, improving. I guess what are the big things that you call out in this book? What kind of behavior are we fixing?
So the biggest takeaway that any parent can have if they have a new kid, toddlers, they're in the terrible twos, what have you, is that all behavior continues as long as it's effective. This goes across the board for all people. This goes across the board for animals. To be honest, use behavior therapy with dog, and also the same thing. Is the behavior effective, right? And what it comes down to is if your kid's crying for a cookie, and someone in the house says, you know what, just give him a cookie. That child has simply learned that crying gets me cookies. Kids learn best from what happens next. So if we make sure we reward what we want to see, we'll see more of that. If we learn how to redirect what we don't want to see, then we'll see less of it. If we allow certain consequences, and I always preface by saying rule number one is be kind. So when I say consequences, I don't want people to think of corporal punishment, but simply sometimes you have to let a child know, like, now we can't play, or now you can't play with that, or now this is a consequence because you behaved in a way that's not appropriate. They will learn, okay, that wasn't effective. Let me try something else. I talk to parents about tantrums, how to manage tantrums, the way to talk to kids, things that they can specifically do, and things that they can specifically say to a child that's going to help decrease the frequency of these behaviors they don't want to see, as well as increase the frequency of behaviors you want to see. Because it's not so much my way or the highway, and it's also not, I don't want my child to ever cry, so I'm going to give them whatever they want, right? It's our job to raise our children as to be independent adults. It's our job to make a child aware of the reality of the world outside the home. So you want to give rewards for good behavior. You do want to give consequences for bad behavior. You want to explain things to kids. In my book, I give parents those hacks. I call it hacks, but it's really techniques that's evidence based of things that I use in my field from behavior analysis. I've been doing it for, across the last 2 decades with hundreds of kids. And once I had my daughter, I realized, wait a second, what I'm doing at work is something I can offer to people all over the world. I can offer this to any parent because it can increase my child's communication. It can increase my child's ability to overcome picky eating. It can increase my child's ability to regulate when they're having tantrums. And it's important for the parents to be self-aware, right? A lot of times we're not We lose the forest for the trees, and it's easy to look at the child's behavior, look at the situation, and get frustrated. But kids are very much mirroring, they're very much mimics, if you will, and mirror our energy. So if we're hot, they're going to be hot. If we're cool, they're more likely to be cool. If a child's having a full on tantrum and you're telling them, calm down, relax, we don't have time for this, we don't have time for this, that's not going to be helpful. That's not going to yield the results that somewhere in your brain you imagine they would just, oh, okay, sorry, Dad, I didn't realize that this wasn't the time for that. I'm so glad that you yelled at me to relax and let me just calm down. Now, but if you take a deep breath and you go down to their eye level and you look at them with a very calm face, they're still going to tantrum, but they're going to have a different response to that energy. And it's not a one off, it's not a quick fix, it's not a diet pill that you take and then you're done. It's a discipline. You maintain the consistency of the discipline and pay attention to your child's trending behavior changes. You'll start to realize this is working. If I just keep doing X, Y, and Z, my child's going to give me the behaviors that I want to see. And it's easier for both of us, but it's a process. It's not a one off, it's a process. And I'll give you an example from my daughter and several friends. When my daughter was about 9 months, 10 months old, I decided I'm going to teach her how to point. Right, and that's one of the programs I run with the 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds with autism in my school because that's one of the first ways to communicate what you want. What do you want? As opposed to the kid taking your hand and pointing to the kitchen, just crying until you figure it out. They point, you're like, okay, you want that? Great, here you go. So I taught her how to point. It took me a day, and once I realized that I was able to do what I do at work with my daughter, I reached out to 4 friends of mine that all had kids within a 2-week span of when my kid was born. All right, and I said, hey, is your kid pointing yet? And they all said no. I said, great. Let me ask you, do me a favor. Try doing this for the next 2 to 3 days and let me know if they start pointing. 48 hours, I reached out to all of them. 3 out of 4 said, holy cow, Chris, my kid's pointing. Like, they got it. They got it. I was like, yep, cool. The one who didn't right now has severe autism. And that's the only reason they didn't, because they did have a severe delay. And, I'm working with that parent too to use different strategies to help alleviate the severity of such. But it's a lot of our behavior. How do we engage our child and how do we respond to their needs is going to make the big difference.
I agree. Consistency matters. You call it disciplined, but the same reactions, the same behaviors, what they're going to learn. I liked what you said about if you come at if you're yelling at them, so they will have a calm response. Counterproductive.
A little bit.
If you want your kids to have calm responses, and to be respectful, then you have to be calm and respectful when you deal with them. You have to model that behavior consistently.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and every parent's going to lose it. I mean, that's
Listen, you can't be
you're not
perfect.
going to be exactly.
There's no such thing as perfect, and I want parents hearing me to realize, like, let go of that concept. I tell people, if you want perfect, find me a perfect tree. You'll spend the rest of your life searching for it. That doesn't exist, right? But what you can do is A, be better than yesterday, and B, be self-aware. Be honest with yourself. Be accountable for your own behavior, in good and bad. Don't avoid looking at the ugly, and don't only look at the ugly at the same time. Be like, you know what? Even me, I've been doing this for as long as I have. I'll have moments with my daughter. I'll walk away like, I could have handled that a little better. And then, tomorrow, let me make sure I do X, Y, and Z. But be aware of what works and stick with it. Be aware of what doesn't work and get rid of it. And then also pay attention to the trends because your kid's not going to just shift behavior overnight. I play the guitar for fun, right? For fun. I'm not like someone who performs or anything. But if I want to learn a song that I like, and I'm going to sit down and watch a YouTube video on how to do it, I'm not going to learn that song in one go. I'm not going to learn that song in 1 week. I might learn it in 1 week, depending on the song. But it's the same thing with anything else that someone's learning. Kids' brains are still developing, so you have to give them time. You have to give them time to model and just,
Sure. And if you're starting super early, if we're talking infant stages, and we're working from there, it's
Mhm.
going to be much easier than if
Mhm.
we're, at age 6, it's chaos. And now we're trying to completely shift what normal is to that kid, because that kid's normal is what he or she has seen mom and dad do and
Exactly.
behave. So,
Exactly.
uh, you know,
To
I guess
piggyback off that, right? The ocean of difference I've seen working because of autism starting when I start with a kid who's age 2 versus starting with them when they're age 3 versus starting with them when they're age 4, and it's the first time they're receiving any services. It is a completely different fight, man. I mean, at age 4, I'm like, oh man, this kid's in trouble. At age 3, I'm like, okay, we can make some progress, but there's going to be some limitations. At age 2, I'm like, I can make this kid lose a diagnosis. We can help this kid just get right through. The transition, right? Like you said, if you start at age 6 to lay down the law, it's too late. It's too late. It's not that it's impossible, but man, you got a fight ahead of you.
Yeah,
If
it's
you
definitely not too late. Like
Right,
the time to start is now.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's going to be a more difficult road because we've got to reframe everything. The
Right.
kid's already reacting in certain ways, already has a set expectation of learned behaviors, and it's all going to change. And
And
you're probably not going to change
mm-mm,
immediately 100% overnight either. So it's going to kind
exactly.
of be sometimes he sees dad act
Mm,
one way and sometimes he sees dad act another way.
right,
And so
right.
it's, yeah, there will be a long transition.
And there's going to be, and the child's also going to, at 6, they have more sophisticated thinking. So the real talk, they're going to ask themselves, why? Like, why are you asking me to change now? And if you don't have a good enough answer, they're not going to have buy-in. One thing I do with all the parents I first work with, the kids are mostly two, I ask them the same question. And without exception, they have no answer. And the question I ask them is simply, what rules do you have for your kid? And they all balk. They're like, rules? I'm like, yeah, your 2-year-old. What rules do you have for your 2-year-old? Because you can set rules at 2. Some people are like, oh, that's mean. Throw that out. Throw that out the window. People are like, I don't want to do that. That's mean. Throw that out the window. What mean equals, and this is coming from a person who's called ACSM parents last week. You know what I mean? I have to because I see kids neglected. I see kids who are abused. I see what I see. I work in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, man. I'm gonna see stuff. I got a bullet hole in my window right across the way. What mean means is when you enjoy the pain of your child, when you enjoy the neglect of your child, when you profit off the pain, or when you profit off the neglect. If those four don't apply, you're not being mean by asking your child to grow up. They can cry, and that's fine. That's what kids do. There's a transition between infancy to toddlerhood that's uncomfortable for everyone. Infancy, a kid is supposed to cry to get what they want. I'm hungry. I'm thirsty. I'm cold. I'm hot. Help me. It's a help me. That's what we're hardwired to do. And you get 12 months free pass to do that. And then after 12 months, when you start walking, you start chatting a little bit, the world shifts and says, okay, the formula is no longer I cry to get what I want. The formula is now you perform to get what you want. And kids don't like that. They're like, no, 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 my entire life has been one way. Let's keep it this way. And they fight. And that's the whole terrible twos, which really lasts from 18 months to about 4 years old. Right? But they fight to say, no, I want to just have to cry to get things. I don't want to perform. I don't want to perform. Life's a performance. Life's a performance. We perform for others in different ways, authentically so, but we learn the roles that we have to play in order to get a job, in order to pay our bills, to get on the bus, whatever it may be. There's things that we have to do that are kind of performative. So when you see that your child's crying because they simply want your phone, if you give them the phone, again, they learn from what happens next. I cry to get the phone. Wait it out. I tell parents, I write on the blog, time your kid's tantrum. Because if you don't know how long your kid will actually tantrum safely, disclaimer, safely, then you might cave in 10 seconds when your kid only had a 20-second fight in them. And if they only have a 20-second fight in them and you wait that out, the next time they tantrum, it's going to be shorter. It doesn't end all tantrums, but it does trend it into the decreasing zone. And
Yeah,
that's
I
why
mean,
you want to be aware.
I've said it a million times. If you start rewarding bad behavior, that's like the worst thing you can do. I mean,
Yep.
that's not going to solve it. If your kids, I mean, that comes down to more minor things like interrupting conversations.
Mm-hmm.
If you're talking to another adult and then they just start, cutting in and yelling and screaming and grabbing your attention, like if you end that behavior immediately, if you're crystal clear that that's not okay, and they can
Right.
stand there and wait, hold your hand until you're done talking, then you can interject. Um, and you do that consistently, that will work.
Right.
But
Right.
stopping your conversation and then giving your attention to child is going to mean that's going to happen all the time. You're
Right.
always going to be interrupted. Your kid's always going to pitch a fit because
Right.
that's how they get you to respond.
Mm-hmm.
And then we could just you got a lot of parents wondering why their kids act the way they act, and they're
100%.
frankly they're brats, they're turds, and mom and dad enabled it. You
Right.
absolutely 100% enabled it because you didn't want to go through the hard work of
Exactly. It's
setting the
difficult.
tone.
And you know
Yeah,
what?
and so now you have all the hard work because you always have to deal with that bad behavior.
Exactly. Listen, you're just trading time.
Which
It
to
doesn't,
me,
it doesn't
which
go
to me
away.
is harder. Yeah,
Right. You're just trading time. Either deal with it now or deal with it later, but you have to deal with it. I tell
yeah,
people the only way out is through. You cannot raise a child without tears. And that's the perfectionism that people kind of aspire to. And I want people to realize that is such a fable. It doesn't exist. Like, please let it go. There's no such thing as tear-free parenting. Your kid is going to cry, especially when they're transitioning from infancy to toddlerhood, because that is what they're hardwired to do. It's your job to be able to be the adult and say, all right, I see where you are right now. You're not having a good time. You're having a big feeling, and that's okay. You're allowed to be upset, but that's not the
Yeah.
way to do it.
Well, and at a sense, you know, that's the first I've heard that where people are striving to not have their kid cry. But I mean, that goes into the discussion of failure and pain and like to develop a well-rounded person, to protect your kid from failure, to protect them from pain, to protect them from loss, from sorrow, things like that. You're depriving them, you're handicapping them as an adult
100%.
because you need loss to
Right.
appreciate what you have. You need
Right.
pain to sometimes help learn or to appreciate when things are good. You
Hmm.
need failure as a learning experience and just to build resilience and grit and
Grit.
self-confidence.
Grit. Listen, there's no one successful on this planet who doesn't have grit and gratitude. And
Oh, sure.
when you spare a child from from pain, loss, suffering, etc., and I'm not saying in any reckless way, folks, but like that's what builds character. And it's actually important to have character. It's important to say, you know what, I dealt with this, and I'm now know that I'm stronger than this because I dealt with this. It doesn't mean you let your kid fall into the lake and they got to figure out how to swim or drown. You know what I mean? But you could be in the lake with them and say, I'm going to catch you and we're going to splash around for a bit. If you struggle a little bit, I got you. There's a way to support your child through your transition. And you know, maybe not tearless crying, but I see so many parents who just they really equate their kid unhappy to them failing as a parent, and that's not failure. That's not failure. And it's not
That's
so much that they're
winning.
manipulating. What?
That's winning.
It's winning. They're growing. Listen, you don't go to you don't hire a personal trainer to compliment your shoes and give you a hug. You know, growth requires pain. All growing requires some struggle, some pain, and the reward in that growth is knowing I'm bigger than that pain. As difficult as that was, as difficult as it was to write that paper, as difficult as it was to run that marathon, as difficult as it was to work through my relationship issues, I got through it. I did it. I'm stronger than that. And I like that about myself because I now know I am capable. You know,
Sure.
progress and capability are the foundations of happiness. You want your child to be happy. Teach them they're capable, not because mommy supported you and protected you and wrapped you in bubble wrap. They're capable because they, through their own strength and grit, were able to get from point A to point B.
Well, yeah, and as soon as they get to the real world, I mean, if mom and dad have protected them this whole time, have solved all their problems for them, have kept them from feeling failure, from feeling pain and loss, when they get to the real world, it's gonna hammer 'em. I mean, that's where
Yeah,
you start getting, you have adults with so much anxiety, so much depression, so much lack of self-confidence. The whole snowflake world that we call them. Where kids just can't handle any sort of pressure,
right.
uh, or any sort of resistance, or they haven't built up resilience. Mom and dad, when you learn that when you screw up and fail, the world keeps moving. It's going to be okay the next day,
Gonna be okay.
and you learned. Yeah, you can work. I mean, you just said it a few minutes ago. That's how you build those skills, and it's incredibly important. And I think parents, I've heard a few say this. They're trying to give their kids, the advantages and all the things that they didn't have growing up. And I
Right.
think what they forget is they forget to give their kids the things they did have growing up as well.
Very, very well said. You know, very well
Oh,
said. It's funny
perfect.
you say that. Just this morning, I was listening to Eric Thomas, and he was reflecting on something just like that. He huge motivational speaker for anyone listening who doesn't know him, and he made the point his son called him out. He said, "Dad, you're trying to make me have grit that you haven't prepared me for. Like you were homeless. You're trying to make me have a homeless mentality. I can't. You had me driving you had me driving a Cadillac when I was a sophomore in college. Like that's not going to apply to me. Like I know respect, but how am I supposed to have that level of grit when you have me living in this level of society?" And I was like, "Dad, that's a good point, kid." And it's while trying to spare a kid from what you suffered to an extent is good. They can't experience everything you suffered because of the fact that you're already as present as you are, the fact that you're already as emotionally caring as you are. If you're not your dad, if you're not your mom, if you feel like if you're striving to be better than your parents, you're already winning. You're already winning. Your kids are good. But it's not to make your child suffer for nothing. Obviously, you want to avoid certain suffering. You don't want them to come into like drug addiction. You don't want them to suffer from crime. You don't want to suffer
Well,
from
sure,
right.
that's danger.
Right, like
That's
physical
different.
danger, obviously, but let your child fail. It's okay. Let your child fail. They'll be okay. That's how you learn. Failure is the best fertilizer for success. You're like, all right, that didn't work, but you know what? I'm coming back stronger. That's gonna give me tenacity. That's gonna give me that desire to have perseverance. If you never play sports, how much of a fighter can you be? You know, if you never compete, how strong is your will and desire to get something if everything's always just given to you? Let them earn it.
Yeah.
Let them earn it.
I,
And kids can earn it from 2 years old.
yeah, I'd say there's pathways outside of sports. I was definitely a sports guy, but it's not to say musicians or artists or you know, kids in the drama club didn't have to compete and fail and things
Well,
like that
yes,
too.
I said
It's
competition. Yeah, you
sure.
want right. You need to be faced up against the potential to fail. You need to be faced up against, ooh, this might not work,
Yeah.
and then you're really gonna learn yourself how you
And
respond.
then to counteract that argument of I guess what was it, Eric Thomas you said?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, ET.
so he was homeless growing up, but his kid's not. He's trying to drive that mentality. I mean, I think there is an element of share those stories of failure. Don't try and posture that dad's perfect,
Mm.
but share those
Mm-hmm.
stories, how you failed, what you learned from that, what that
Mm-hmm.
experience has prepared you for, how it gave you a different perspective. Uh, Being homeless really makes you appreciate having any roof.
Yeah,
you know, you know,
yeah,
a
yeah.
700 square foot house is amazing. That has indoor plumbing, maybe a window unit AC. In the worst section of town is great because it's so much better than being under a bridge or
Right,
being in a shelter.
right.
So it gave me that. So I think sharing those stories, sharing that perspective, because I don't think necessarily, exactly what he's doing. He doesn't want his kid to have to start exactly where he started. We want to give them a leg up.
Right.
We want to, but you have to share those experiences and those perspectives and those stories. And I think what some dads are out there, they're changing history, or they're not sharing everything because they want to be this perfect bravado example of a man that doesn't fail, that that's
Mm-hmm.
never come up short, that everything is just golden that he touches. The
Mm-hmm.
Take Trump for example. Like, has Trump ever admitted to failing at anything?
Not that I know
No, no.
of.
Everything he does is perfect.
Right, right,
Um, and that kind of mentality, A, it's fraudulent, but B,
right.
I don't think it helps raise kids. I think you should share with them and we don't know what he does as a father. He might, tell his kids and just in the public eye,
That's fair.
puts
That's
on
fair.
that show.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, share the fail. So that way, when your kid fails, they don't feel like a complete failure. Like, dad was perfect and I can't even do
Right,
that,
right. I can't
and you
measure that.
always feel less than, and to a very real extent, I want my kids to be better than me. I don't
Right,
want to be the alpha in the family forever. I don't want to be the guy that no one can ever reach or
right,
touch or
right,
surpass.
right.
Uh, that's just a mentality with it. But that involves, sharing those failures, sharing those lessons that you learned, and then letting them experience real life.
Absolutely. I agree, brother. I
Now
agree.
we've moved to an older kids discussion, but uh, certainly at the younger level, I think you said it perfect, and we've had that discussion on this, on our platform before. Of, you know, to change behavior, to get the behavior you want, you have to be incredibly clear. You
Yeah,
have to be consistent, and everything has to be immediate, especially at these younger ages.
exactly.
What
Exactly.
when you're talking 1, 2, 3, 4 years old, you can't wait till the end of the day
No.
or tomorrow or the end of the week to say, hey,
No.
remember that time, and try and
Right.
make a connection there.
Right.
It
You
needs to
can't
be
even make that
immediate
right.
right now.
You can't say,
When you
okay, then
interrupt,
this weekend we're not going out. The kid's like, well, that's 4 days away. I'm in right now. I'm in the right now. It's got to be
yeah,
okay. Then we're done playing with this. Okay,
and
then you know.
and there's a theory out there that I like. So when there's a negative behavior or something you don't like, immediately correct it and say, that's not okay. Do not do
Mhm.
that. Stop it. Don't reward it, certainly. But there's a theory out there, floated by a psychiatrist we had on, of it's actually best to ignore that behavior.
All right.
Now, you can't do that all the time. I certainly don't do that. But if you don't give the bad behaviors attention while simultaneously, when they're behaving good, give that all your attention, that the root thing kids really want is mom and dad's attention. They
Right.
want mom and dad paying attention to them,
Yes.
showing them love, expressing admiration for them. So if you want your kid, you know, when they're doing something bad, they're fighting with their siblings in their room. If you ignore them, if they come to you screaming about how their brothers are fighting, and you just say you solve it yourself, why are you coming to me? And let them, you know, be basically alone with their badness. Uh, and then when they're in their room playing or playing a game of chess, and you come up and sit there and say, "Hey, I love it when you guys are behaving
Hmm.
so well.
Yep.
You're being respectful to each other." And so always giving your attention and your compliments and your encouragement to those behaviors, which I think a lot of parents, especially me, that's just how you're supposed to act. So like, why
We take it for
compliment that?
granted.
Why reward that? We
We
do.
take it for
We
granted.
take it for
Right.
granted. And if we're
Right.
constantly pointing that out and calling it, then that's just reinforcing the behaviors we want, and we're making that clear connection consistently.
Right.
Uh,
Well, like
so
you said, you want to catch them being good. That's really the essence. Two big takeaways for anyone: the behavior continues as long as it's effective, and catch them being good. If they're doing what you want them to do, be vocal. Every kid has the same exact favorite word. It's their name. They don't care why they're hearing their name. They want to hear their name. It's attention from mommy and daddy. So if you're saying it mostly when they're misbehaving, you're going to see a lot more misbehaving. And it's not so much ignoring all bad behavior, right? Because some behavior obviously is dangerous, but it's letting your response be really boring, right? You want to be very neutral. If they're having a bad behavior, doing something you don't like, you can make a comment and say that's not how we behave, but you don't want to say, Jeremy, what's wrong with you? I can't believe you're doing this again. That's really stimulating. And kids like three things: they like volume, they like speed, and they like energy. And when we're angry, the way that we move and gesture and speak is a lot more interesting than if we're speaking in a I take this for granted behavior. Oh, nice drawing. That's pretty cool. That's boring.
yeah,
That's so boring. That's so unsatisfying to their senses. But if you flip it, and it's gonna feel fake at first. I tell parents like, listen, I get it. It's like, oh, I want to be authentic. You trust me on this. Like, go with me on this. The results are the proof's in the pudding. Fake it for a little bit. It'll become more natural for you, but you're gonna get the response from a kid that you actually want. So you see a kid doing something simple as sitting nicely on the couch instead of jumping on. Oh, Jeremy, thank you so much for sitting nicely on the couch. Daddy loves it when you sit nicely. Again, that's fake, but the kid doesn't know that, and they receive that, and they're getting credit for doing
and
something they
there's
should be doing.
so to clarify, there's excitement in your voice. There's a timbre of energy
Right.
versus just the plain words. No, I like what you're saying. The mundane, the common. Because I think, like I said, we were just saying that's where we come up short. We'll compliment the great thing. You walk an old lady across the street, great, good job. You bring
Right.
home an egg, great, good job. But then we don't compliment when they're sitting quietly doing their homework.
Right.
We don't.
Right.
I mean, we like it, but we're not pointing that out and excited and praising that. Uh, and so, the routine, the boring, the things that they're doing that are good, they're not bad. That's the things we want.
Right.
If we bring attention to that, we bring excitement and praise to that, then that's what they're going to want to do. That's what just the deep down inside of them is going to want to continue those behaviors because they know mom and dad like it.
one Hundred
And at
percent.
those ages, they want to make mom and dad happy. They want mom and
Yep.
dad's attention.
Yep. 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 100%. 100%.
Well,
And then when
beautiful.
it
Well,
comes to when it comes to rules, right? If they're doing behavior you don't like, there's certain phrases that toddlers really respond well to. It's if then statements, first then statements, and when then statements. These are a great way to establish rules. And if anyone out there is like, well, how do I establish a new rule for my kids now? I don't want to be arbitrary. Start of the week is a good time. If you move, that's a great time. Birthdays are the best time to introduce new rules because for them it's a new chapter. Like, oh wow, you're 5, that means you have to clean your room because you're a big boy now, and they'll be more. There's more buy-in. They're like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm 5. Yeah, that makes sense. Something new. If it's Tuesday night and you gotta put your dishes away forever now, like why? But
sure.
start of the week, you'll see. Start of the week, start of a year, any new chapter that's obvious, it's a great time to introduce new rules. And if you use if then, when then, and first then statements, if you clean up your dishes, then you can pick dessert tomorrow night, depending on how old the kid is. If you clean up your toys, then mommy will read you a story. First we do this, then we do this. It computes very easily for a kid. It gives them a sense of the sequence of events. It lets them know what's going to happen next, as opposed to don't do this, don't do that, stop doing this, negative rules.
I like that. So, I mean, it's almost like guiding them into manhood and womanhood of like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
every birthday, hey, new responsibilities, new,
Yeah.
new, new. sets of accountability
Hmm.
and rules.
Hmm.
So my big thing on rules and also as family values is like you said, you ask a parent what the rules are in the house, and they kind of go, they don't even know because they're making it up as they go.
Yeah.
Uh, so my big thing was that is like have a written record, something tangible, something real. Like if you want rules to be followed and they are like the core of your household,
Right.
have them written down and post them somewhere. My
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah.
That way everyone's on the same page. It's clear, it's transparent, it's
Hmm.
obvious. When
Hmm.
that's broken, we can just point towards the wall and
Yep.
say, "Well, we've talked about this before."
Right. Right.
And that is a lot better tactic than dad or mom's always winging it. And when something's not exactly the way they want it, they yell at their kid, and the kid's trying to piece all these things together. And kids, even as adults, as an employer, you have to tell someone like 20,000 times before they hear it for the first time. Um, and, and when you write it and it's tangible and it's there, it's heard a lot
Yeah.
sooner and a lot
Yeah.
quicker. And
Right.
there's just more accountability because there's going to be more consistency. And like I said, we talked about clear, immediate, and consistent.
Hmm.
That's definitely clear and that's definitely consistent if we're constantly referencing it. And so not only for rules but for family values too, things that are important to the families.
Yeah.
And that's going to vary per family, but hey, this is what our family stands for.
Yeah.
This is how we are raising you. When
Right.
you're an
Right.
adult, you can choose your own path. We hope it's very similar to our path, but this is what we stand for. And if it's written down, you're not winging it. You're not flying by the seat of your pants. And it
No
makes
excuses, no arguments there.
it
It's
makes
right
all
there.
the great yeah it makes all those gray area discussions a lot clearer. Because
Yeah.
you kind of know where you stand.
Right. 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 I love
So
that. I love that.
yeah,
That's
it's
yeah.
I'm big with that one. Because I mean, you probably have the same thing. You ask parents what the rules are, what the family values are, and there is almost never do you get immediate answer where they can
Right.
just roll off their tongue because
Right.
they don't know.
They don't know. And
Turns out
most
adults,
rules are fed and are reactionary, and it's not the best strategy to introduce rules as they're being broken,
yeah.
and that's what a
Well,
lot of parents do.
it's not consistent and it's not clear.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so that's my big thing. All right. Great talk. We're coming up on 45 minutes now, which is
Cheers.
about our time cap. So if you want to finish off, leave people with a bit of wisdom or how to find more about you or plug something, this is your time.
All right. Let's see. Bit of wisdom. The key is kindness. Things to leave you with. Behavior will continue as long as it's effective. Catch them being good. And you can find me at 101behaviorhacks.com. That's 101behaviorhacks.com. Both my ebook and my paperback are available on the landing page. And I know it's tricky out there, folks. Take a deep breath. Give yourself credit. Give yourself a pat in the back. You got this. You got this.
All right, Chris, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for the time, Townsend. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
All right.
This is a 100% Dad production. You must visit our website at 100dad.com, 100dad.com. Find us on TikTok and Instagram at 100dad, at 100dad. And as always, email Townsend at 100dad.com. Now hit that subscribe button.